This is the Lightning Talk session. I'm Neil Grindley. I work at JISC, this organisation in the UK. And my colleague here is...
Donna McCrosty, and I'm from the University of Melbourne in Australia.
Great, so we're delighted to share this session. So it's going to be very busy, very exciting, quick-fire session. We're going to hear a lot in a short space of time. The way it's going to work is that the presenters are going to be lining up here and coming on, doing their 3 to 4 minute presentation. There may or may not be time for questions. We don't really know. We'll have to see as we go along. If you do want to put your hand up and try and get a question in, and we'll might try and accommodate that, but it depends on the timing. So anyway, looking forward to it. And I think perhaps we should just get started, in fact. And so welcome Anna, who's going to get going for us.
I believe that the obsolescence of Adobe Flash has had a huge impact on the digital preservation community, which is why today my lightning talk will focus on elucidating some of the methods available for restoring access to web artifacts made with Flash. In particular, it would be important for me to acknowledge the angle at which I'm approaching this from, as Flash was prevalent across multiple domains. My case study is based on a work of internet art from 2001 by the Korean artist Sine Kim. The functioning of Genesis is quite simple. It is essentially a website consisting entirely of client-side scripts. The Flash animations are called up using pop-up windows in response to the user clicking through a menu of options, which tell the story about the beginnings of the web and the beginnings of the world. Depending on which element is clicked by the user, the pop-up windows change color, vibrate, and arrange themselves in ways that imitate the selected entity. For instance, the image on the slideshow shows the sun and moon option. As you can see, on the left-hand side of the page, there are 4 red windows representing the sun. Meanwhile, on the right-hand side, a more elongated yellow-colored window represents the moon. I find that artistic experimentation of the media of Flash is particularly interesting as it adds an additional layer of complexity to digital preservation processes. For instance, if we were to migrate the work from the Adobe Flash format to the contemporary open HTML5 format, would that new instance of the work still be deemed authentic? In other words, is the artist's original source code at all an indicator of whether a digital artifact is authentic or not? The contents of this presentation are based on some independent research that I've been conducting to evaluate an alternative method for restoring access to Flash-based artifacts. Much of the existing scholarship has focused on virtualization and emulation-based strategies, as well as web archiving. Web archiving tools, namely Conifer, have proven to be particularly troublesome with Genesis, as there's only a select number of browser emulations that are available to the user. Unfortunately, none of the available browsers execute the artwork correctly. They disregard the set sizing of the pop-up windows and stack them on top of each other. Given Conifer's limited capacities in terms of customizing the browser emulations, the alternative would have been to implement a fully functioning emulator or virtual machine. However, in my interview with the artist, it was felt that in order to stay true to the work's intention, Genesis had to stay on the live web. At first, the artist suggested migrating the Flash animations to the visual language processing. However, I wanted to find a migration path that focuses on reactivating existing material rather than complete reconstruction using alternative languages such as processing. It is here that I ended up proposing to decompile the Flash executables using the free and open source software JPXS Flash Decompiler and reprogram them in the integrated development environment of Adobe Animate, a vector-based animation software developed by Adobe that eventually replaced the Adobe Flash software. In this way, the original vector graphics can be reused and the interactivity reprogrammed from the ActionScript language to JavaScript. As the two languages are syntactically similar, this method is less laborious than completely reconstructing the work in processing. And now I come back to the question of authenticity that I introduced earlier. Perhaps my method of migrating Genesis with the use of decompilation and later interrogation at Adobe Animate points to the need to reconceptualize the notions of authenticity. For my case study, authenticity presents itself as the ability to reenact the work in different ways, even if that means migrating it to a newer format. In our interview, the artist expressed that she feels like the technical simplicity of her work means that it could be reprogrammed by anyone. She did not attach any particular meaning to the original code itself, but more so to the wider community's ability to interact and reenact the different levels of the work, including its representation as code. The time-limited nature of this very short presentation means that I cannot go into all of the conceptual affordances that this particular technique opens up. However, I have published this research back in January in the Journal of the Institute of Conservation, so I invite everyone to have a look at it. Thank you everyone for listening.
Right, thank you, Anna. Right, I'm going to be talking to you about automatically preserving and surfacing records from Microsoft 365 in a digital preservation system, what I am rather modestly calling the future of digital preservation. I hope to explain why. The idea here is that you would you would deploy an application in Microsoft 365 that would automatically transfer records to and from your digital preservation system, invisibly to the user. So let's look what that would look like in practice. Well, you see now that there's a button appeared at the top of your SharePoint screen that says Archive. You select some records, you click on Archive, you tell it, do you want to move or copy, and it's in Preservica. It's automatically transferred. That is the extent of appraisal and transfer. But when you search for that content and you say, tell me what's in the archive, it lists the content that is in Preservica, not in SharePoint, in Preservica, and allows you to say, and I'd like to download that, please. And it offers you the alternative. Do you want the access copy? Do you want the preservation copy? In other words, it's done all the digital preservation stuff in Preservica, and you can pull it back into Microsoft. The user never goes to Preservica. So let's look what that looks like when you start to think about retention labels. You can map retention labels onto actions as well. You can say, if you assign this retention label, do something. So let's look at that. We're going to assign a retention label to this content, and that is archive it. And we let it sit there, and suddenly it's all gone, because that was mapped on to move it to the archive. And again, when we look in Preservica, it's all there. And that was all sorts of weird and wonderful image formats that have now been migrated to JPEG for access purposes. Again, when we go and search for that content in Microsoft, we can see it says move to digital preservation. So again, the user is not going near Preservica. They're logged into SharePoint and they're looking for stuff in Preservica, and they're pulling it back into their SharePoint environment. But it's not just SharePoint. Everyone talks about SharePoint, but of course Microsoft is a whole big thing. What about Microsoft Teams? Well, again, here's a Teams channel post and a load of replies. You can pick archive that, please. You go, do you want all the replies in that? Yes, I do. Thanks very much. And boof, the whole lot goes across to preservation. Preserved as multi-part assets with the data, the message, and any attachments all in a multi-part asset for preservation. So this is being built at the moment. We're trialing it. We're getting really good feedback from real users who manage both Microsoft and Preservica instances, as Tanya Marshall, who's one of many that have given us real feedback. So in the future, digital preservation will be fully integrated with live systems. You won't know you're doing digital preservation. It isn't a throw it over the wall paradigm, it's a send it and get it back paradigm. You send it to your preservation system and get it back to your preservation system, but you never leave your content management system. You need automatic curation can be achieved by using machine learning to assign those retention labels. You have fully automated digital preservation at the back end, so the user never has to worry about file formats. And it all just works. It'll be out in early 2023. If you're interested, come and chat to us and I can give you a live demo. Thank you.
Right. Lovely, thank you, John.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nathan Isip from the University of the Philippines School of Library and Information Studies, and I'm here to talk to you about our new-ish building. It might seem incongruous to talk about a building in a conference on digital preservation, but it really goes a long way towards the advocacy aspect of digital preservation when you convince people to ingest their collections with you when they have something to see and to even if it's just a blinking black box. We also have some rather sensitive moving image collections that might be personally or politically confidential, and it really helps having our own facilities for that. We inherited the building, that's why it's newish, from the Department of Zoology. As you can imagine, the laboratories in that building is more appropriate for preserving animals than it is for preserving records. People were actually afraid of going upstairs for fear of ghosts. No, that's not the ghost, that's the priest they brought in to talk to the ghosts. Thankfully, this was not a listed building, and we could basically remove everything inside and design it from the ground up. We had to think of our use cases, and as a teaching university, we needed to be able to accommodate students in our laboratories. We needed to be able to provide services to the university as well as to other organizations. It was with these three functions in mind that we started to design the new building. The existing rooms were completely torn down, and we have empty spaces on a grid. Hence, the blueprints and our CAD designs. And that's the first tip. Have someone in your team that can advocate for the needs of your service while also explaining that in design terms that architects and engineers could understand. Conversely, have that person in that team explain it to other people in your team. A lot of planning that we had were delayed because people did not understand what we were actually talking about. 3D renders are great for showing to donors, not so much for actually planning your building. I'd like to think we've come up with a good relationship between the different functional areas of our building, and you can see how our laboratories are at the center of the building, reflecting its place at the heart of our operations. This would be the view from above, which also shows a separation between access and processing. The layout also allows for the easy movement of records between different laboratories and even our record store on the second floor. And this is largely inspired by kitchen efficiency, where things have to be no more than 2 doors away. So the design looks good so far, but time for the caveats. This would be the load calculations for air conditioning. It's something that architects can easily design. Not so much custom laboratories. If you look at this, this would be the different rooms and the wiring circuits for each room. However, if you look at this, you can see that the circuits are allocated only 800 volt amperes each. Can you imagine the moment you plug your servers in or you plug your scanners in and your breakers start tripping? So again, it's really important to be able to coordinate. And one of the things we did was even before we knew we had the budget for it, we started listing down what we wanted in our laboratories. That's completely aspirational. We had no idea if we're going to get it, but we had to list them down for the load balancing as well as for electrical calculation. Same goes with fire suppression. It took a while to be able to convince them to give us clean agent suppression instead of water-based suppression. And we eventually convinced them by throwing EN 16893 at them. But then we got this email. Upper management decided to remove a lot of the clean agent. And that would be my final tip. It takes a lot of goodwill and lobbying. You can see here, our school is not actually the end user of the building. So it takes a lot of building relationships. It takes a lot of advocating to be able to defend the needs of your service. Our building is nearing completion, and we'll be moving into it, but we are still a blank canvas, and I love to hear your suggestion and thoughts about it. So look me at after the end of these talks. Thank you.
Okay. Oops. Sorry. Sorry, what's the...
Okay.
For the green button, it's just... It skips the next...
Bertrand? So you're missing some slides.
Am I?
I don't know. Have you got slides, a slide deck, or is it just a...
There was,
just a heading
but
slide?
maybe I can do the talk without them.
Well, that would be great. you go for it.
Okay, let's go. So my talk today is about the ARC identifier, a reminder to you of what it is and what it's not, and also an update on the ARC Alliance, which is the maintenance organization which took over the support of the ARC identifier schema and its associated infrastructure in 2021. The talk happens in 2022 when we have 21 years of existence for the ARC identifier, with almost 1,000 organizations. If I remember well, it's 992, having assigned more than 8 billion identifiers. So I would like to start by saying what ARC identifier, as any persistent identifier, is not. It's not a digital, it's not a solution, it's not a technology, it's not a system. In fact, it's just the tip of the preservation iceberg, which means you still, if you want your users to cite your resources on the long term, you still have to describe them and preserve them on the long term. So what is the ARC identifier? Well, it's a non-paywalled, flexible identifier relying on a specification, which is essentially what the ARC identifier is, and it's still under the standardization process. And this specification helps you create opaque, stable, robust identifiers that you're likely to be able to maintain over the long term with minimum investment. And the ARC identifier, again, like other persistent identifier schemas, is a promise that you make to your users and that you have to keep for a confidence in your services. So I'm sorry, I would have liked to show a map of showing the community growing at a steady pace in the last 3 or 4 years, all over the globe, with a major development in US, in general in North America, in Europe, especially in France, and in other parts of the globe, of course. I wanted to talk to you about the ARC Alliance a little bit. You will find all information about the organization that maintains the registry of the NAN numbers, the organization numbers, and the resolver on the website arcs.org, which is fairly simple, you will remember. You have the Twitter handle too, which is arcs, I don't remember, sorry. And a forum in French and the Google forum too in English to help you. And finally, I would just say that I have a few stickers, a very limited amount of stickers. So if you want to have a chat about ARCs and have some stickers, please come quick, because there is no stickers for everyone. Thank you.
Oh. That was very well done indeed. Well done, Bertrand.
Hi, I'm Sybil Schaefer.
And I'm Else Giron.
And we'd like you to open the door for version 4 of the digital preservation storage criteria. So for those of you who are not familiar, the preservation storage criteria is a set of criteria designed to enumerate the characteristics of digital preservation storage as opposed to storage used for general operational purposes. And it's important to note that not all criteria are going to be used in any one organizational setting, but some are actually related to international standards requirements. So what's new in the digital preservation storage criteria? We have standards mapping, new and revised criteria, new and revised categories, and usage guide revisions. Standards mapping. We did the quite laborious and sometimes tedious work of mapping the criteria to international standards, all of the ones listed here. We have new and revised criteria. I'll take it over. I almost took over her section.
Actually, one of the ones we found was identifiable. We don't know how we missed that in version 3, because that's a very important one. And we found that in ISO 16363. We also found that some of them were quite similar, as you see here at the REST server-side encryption with managed key, and the other one the same with self-managed keys. So we merged those together, not to get too many criteria. But it did raise from 61 criteria to 75, but it's good criteria. And the total of new criteria that we found was actually 6. It did give a lot to go through those standards. We also have a new category because we had a category saying integrity service, and that was a bit too narrow. And what we found out was that it was a preservation actions, where you also have this integrity checking both independently and locally. And then we had all these identifiable, discoverable, preservation action execution, where a lot of them were actually found in other standards and independent preservation actions. What we have next, Sybil said that there was a user guide as well, but that is on the way. But we know what we want to write about, because that's what we found in our work working with version 4. So we will have something about preservation strategies, change management, physical media management, organizational issues, audits, and documentation. Maybe some of them will overlap, but we think this is what is going to come. And version 4 of the criteria may not be on the site yet, but will be it within the next month. They just finished 1 week before iPres, so. Okay. We always want to hear your feedback to the criteria, because it's also for your use. You can join the Google group, as you see up there, DP Storage at googlegroups.com, or you can see more on
our OSF site, which is on the back of our shirts in case you don't get it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hello, I'm going to talk about the carbon footprint of digital preservation. There's been lots of really interesting discussion in the community about environmental sustainability of long-term digital preservation. There was an excellent session here at iPres this morning, but there is a real lack of actual numbers for carbon footprint of doing digital preservation in practice. Maybe it's not surprising. Digital preservation involves complex data life cycles, extended supply chains, and so on. At Archivum, we host a digital preservation solution in the cloud. So what we did is we measured the carbon footprint from energy consumption in Google Cloud when using our solution. We can do that because Google reports on the resources that we use when running our solution, so compute and storage, and the actual gross carbon emissions from energy consumption when using those resources. So that means we can run real digital preservation scenarios in the cloud and look at the specific carbon emissions associated with them. And that's what it looks like. Here's just a couple of examples. So for large research data sets, so petabyte data volumes that go through minimum viable preservation type processes, it's actually the storage that dominates the carbon footprint, which is measured in tons. So that's, put that in context, that's like flying a jumbo to the States and back. But for other types of content, for example, lots of office documents where the data volumes might be small, but lots of processing might be applied, for example, characterization and file format normalization, it's the processing that dominates the emissions. And here, I mean, the emissions of processing and storing 1 million office files is about the equivalent of driving 500 miles or so in a car. I've been really careful to say gross emissions. In Google's case, the net emissions are 0. They already use a high percentage of renewable energy and they carbon offset the rest. So that's really good news from an energy point of view. It doesn't mean that the overall carbon emissions are 0. There is the embodied carbon footprint to take into account too, which we haven't done yet. So the manufacture, transport and disposal of all the ICT equipment involved and Google's data centers. But it's at least a start. I mean, what we did find is that carbon footprint can vary hugely with the type of data that you have, the volumes you're processing, what tools you use, what steps are applied, how the data is stored, and how often it's accessed. But the key thing is if you can measure the footprint, then you can understand what parts of the process have the most impact, and then you can make decisions on what to do about it. If you're interested in finding out more, I put a blog post up on the DPC website a week or so ago, and that also links through to a report on Figshare that details the methodology that we followed, explains those results that I presented. As I say, it focuses on carbon emissions from energy consumption rather than embodied footprints, so there's still more work to be done. But I hope that this and some of the results that other people started posting this morning help move the whole discussion on environmental sustainability a little bit further forwards. Thank you.
Hello. So archives, they're often not thought about until the end, but how much can you really put off until the end without the detriment of the entire project? If person A creates a video and hands it to person B, but doesn't tell person B who the creator is, who's even in it, and who the copyright holder is, what can you do with that video? Archaeological archives hold vast quantities of information. This information can go about and literally rewrite history. Of course, that is assuming that the information within the archive can be understood. The larger the project, the more important this is. At 330 miles, the High-Speed 2 project is the largest infrastructure project in the history of the United Kingdom. It spans from London in the south through Birmingham and up to Manchester in the north of England. Due to the scale of it, HS2 is split up into multiple phases and sections, and each of those sections are then given to multiple contractors. As you can imagine, the amount of archaeology that's produced during this is immense. But it's not just physical finds. 3D models, videos, drone, LiDAR, CADs, documents, all of this is also created and then sent to me at the Archaeology Data Service, where I then go and I accession it, I archive it, and then eventually disseminate it. But as long as everything goes well and I'm given all of the metadata, then we're all fine. But as you can imagine, this is perhaps not always the case. Each archive is created from a site or a collection of sites that's generated by contractors on behalf of High-Speed 2, most of which have worked with us before. Depending on the complexity, there may be additional subcontractors that are then involved. Now here, in essence, is the issue, and it's important to understand from the very beginning. Who is responsible for creating it, and who's responsible for documenting what has been created? Is it the contractor who sends me the data, or is it the subcontractor who created it? Now, as long as we have an idea, that's fine. We have a collection metadata sheet which should tell us who the primary contact is and who the creators are. However, too often, we're just given the organization that created it with no further information. And in most cases, that's fine. I would say over 95% of cases, we've got no issue. But what do we do about the other 5%? Recently, we've had an issue where a subcontractor didn't fully fill out the metadata. And so that means that the 3D model that was created, we don't know all of the information relating to it. And how important is that? Do we still have value for accountability of the work done? And does it provide enough for the reuse? Or is it as if that work was never done and we should just delete it? Now, is this XYZ RGB intensity for this XYZ file? We think so, based off of what we've seen in the past, and yet we don't actually know. Then what becomes of the data if we can't get this information from the subcontractor? Do we dispose of it because we don't have all the information about how it was supposed to be generated? By all accounts, it's a fantastic model. Do we disseminate it with imperfect data, with a disclaimer that says, we think this is what it is, but the people who create it didn't actually tell us. Hope you find it useful. The the metadata is important, and archives serve an important purpose. They help provide access to the incredible wealth of information created during large infrastructure projects such as HS2, or even single trench excavations. And so, however as good the data is, it's only as important as the metadata that's deposited with us.
Good afternoon. Accessing the League of Nations digital archives. What are these League of Nations archives? The League of Nations archives are documents dating from 1919 to 1946 is the predecessor of the United Nations. The international importance was recognized by UNESCO with their inscription in the Memory of the World Register. This is also an important tool for those studying the development of multilateral diplomacy and international relations. We estimated 50 million of pages that result in more than 220 terabytes of data. In 2017, we started a project, the Total Digital Access to the League of Nations, 5 years project with 3 main objectives that were to digitize, provide online access, and ensure the digital preservation. The scanning operation started in 2018, and at the same time, we were in the process of selecting and implementing the IT systems. The first system was the digital preservation. That was a particular challenge and one of the innovative features of our project because very few entities at the UN had used such systems before. We implemented Preservica that helped us to store and preserve the digital content. The second system was an archives management system, and this time we chose the Atom system, access to memory, which provides the structure, context, and descriptive metadata of the collection, as well as the public platform where the users will search and find the information they need. The 2 systems need to be integrated, and that was the second big challenge of the project. So when a user does a search in the public platform and selects a record, if they want to, if they're required to view the digital object, Atom will retrieve this object from Preservica. This is done through a number of scripts, so during the ingest process, metadata is taken from Atom, and this is stored in Preservica with the unique Atom slug. And also, after that, in Atom, they store the unique Preservica ID together with an image, only the thumbnail of the object. After the project, we did some statistics. The number of users before the project, we had about 300 users per year because they had to come on site to consult the papers. They came mainly from Europe and the US. Since we launched the public interface in December 2021, we have been increasing the number of users until more than 37,000 users. So we think we have achieved our goal that was to provide global access to the League of Nations archives, strengthen multilateral diplomacy and international relations by ensuring access to current and future generations of researchers from all over the world. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Blakely McDowell, coming from the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C., here speaking on behalf of FADGI, the Federal Agency's Digital Guidelines Initiative, to speak about a cool new project we have that focuses on audiovisual accessibility. FADGI, as the name implies, is a collaborative effort between U.S. federal agencies to communicate the common sustainable practices and guidelines for digitizing historical, archival, and cultural content. As mentioned, this project focuses specifically on AV accessibility in the form of audio description, closed captions, open captions, sign language interpretation, subtitles, and transcripts. The project has created and is still creating definitions for those various accessibility options, and you can currently see that document online on the FADGI website. I don't have a copy of it, but if you Google FADGI AV accessibility, you will easily find it. So along with definitions of all those various common formats that those accessibility options come in, again, those are audio description, closed captions, open captions, sign language interpretation, subtitles, and transcripts. It lists the benefits and drawbacks of each format and has a section on support for those various formats options in common media players. So while the project by nature focuses on definitions and concerns of U.S. federal agencies, specifically the definitions come from the U.S. Code of Federal Regulations, the FCC or the Federal Communications Commission, the Web Content and Accessibility Guidelines, so that one's actually not just U.S. based, and Section 508 of the U.S. federal government. We certainly hope and believe the research and the backbone of this project can be widely adopted and useful to the international community. Yeah, I'll take questions. I think questions would be better than me just up here sort of rambling on with no slides. So who has a question about AV accessibility and how you want your public to see your AV material and how you could use this? Do you use captions? Do you use subtitles?
A bold
Anyone?
moment within a packed schedule.
90 seconds? Come on.
What about AV content that doesn't have an audio presence, like it's just image with no narration or sound? How do you convey that?
That would be audio description. So you would have an audio file either as a sidecar, like an MP4 or a WAV file, or a VTT that would describe the content on screen that could either be human read and recorded or read by the computer. Good question.
And a concise answer, thank you. Sorry, is that another one there? I think you've stunned them into silence. Thank you very much, Blake.
All right.
Okay, so I'm Sarah Higgins from Aberystwyth University, and I want to talk to you about our scoping project towards a national AI-enabled repository for Wales. That's the project team there on the slide, and it's a collaboration between a large number of cultural heritage organisations across Wales, and our key partners are the Royal Commission on Ancient and Historical Monuments for Wales and the National Library for Wales. So there are the list of participants, most of the universities and most of the major cultural organisations in Wales. So the work aims to be a start point for an AI-enabled cross-repository and knowledge discovery platform for Wales, with more sophisticated and intuitive discovery across the collections and through metadata enhancement. It's going to bring together, we're bringing together both the curator and the creators across Wales to understand the needs, and we hope to develop a new repository should we get funding for the next stage. The scope is data created or kept in Wales, which is of interest to the arts and humanities research. You'll gather this is a very local project. It's bilingual by design. So we've been doing co-creation through focus groups with a wide range of stakeholders, and we've been developing a prototype we have the scoping study, which we're just completing just now. So we've had 4 focus groups, one on data capture, one on data repositories, one on AI-enabled search, and one on knowledge discovery. We ran both of these, we ran 2 on the same day, one online and one face-to-face, so that we could include as many people as possible around COVID regulations or ability to travel. We had 40 complete individual participants across those focus groups. Most of them you'll see were archivists or archaeology archivists.
But we also had some digital preservation specialists. We had a lot of work with some lexicographers, and we're very lucky to have the IIIF coordinator living locally, so he's been participating as well. So what's our key recommendations? Around the repository, we recommend guidelines and responsibilities for data preparation. We thought about particular data types, and 5 were identified as the ones that we would need to focus on. The storage needs to be more trusted. We need to think about data licensing. We'd need to think about a metadata standard, or at least a profile of a metadata standard, probably around Dublin Core. Geospatial interfaces were very much thought about, along with FAIR data and the ability to search across both metadata and the data. We want to build in long-term digital preservation from the outset while we're developing a sustainable funding model. And we wanted to think about the environment. So, you know, quite a big wish list. The prototype is based on DSpace. Probably we haven't got as far as plugging in Archivematica, but Archivematica would probably be plugged into that. That goes to a data converter, which then does the machine learning outputs and brings that metadata back into the repository. So we did quite a lot of work around text and image analysis. You'll see here that the extracted text is not perfect yet, and the segmentation model analysis is identifying different things from the detecting model analysis. And we're doing a workshop in the next week with our focus groups around what can you actually expect? How much can you expect from this? We also discovered that the databases that we were using for the analysis could not identify historical figures, for instance. They didn't identify historical figures as people, so that's something we have to be training the algorithms for, to use historical data. The prototype's also looking at text analysis, so we're identifying text, and it's doing image. We're also doing image analysis and some transcription and translation into Welsh, because obviously it's a bilingual nation and everything has to be bilingual. Sorry, I'm far too long. Key recommendations for the AI are around ethics, accuracy, training the algorithms, training the users, the metadata, and thinking about how we re-ingest the things which are created through the AI. And that's everything I wanted to say.
Sarah.
Well, I really should have changed the title of this tech talk today. And really, I want you to remember 2 numbers, 10.5 trillion and 11. Digital preservation ensures access to digital content regardless of media failure and technology change. The goal of digital preservation is the accurate rendering of authenticated content over time. Why is this important? We all know this because you're digital preservation experts, but it's important because it's the core for commodity for industry, commerce, and governments. Digital materials are used for sharing, accessibility, and revenue generation. They're fundamental to research, law, medicine, industries depend on them, and access to reliable digital materials. And we've heard a lot of that from actually some of the previous lightning talks today. But what are the threats to data? Well, the traditional threats are data stored on a shared network might be subject to data loss, orphan data, it might be destroyed. File formats might become obsolete, and applications that are modern can't read older formats. Storage media itself, the physical hardware, becomes obsolete and unsupported. And we want to make sure that we can protect data with bit rot and decay over time. In other words, knowing that data preserved for many years will still be available. But there are new threats to preserving data. Data that is subject to ransomware, where it's either modified by a user or an unwanted actor. Elements of that data could be deleted. It could be destroyed, or it could be held until you pay a ransom. One of the things that Dell does is when we are designing the engineering for our storage platforms, we look to make sure they conform to standards and design patterns. A great example around data preservation is with the National Data Stewardship Alliance, the NDSA. You know, for example, level 4 of that, we support being able to have 3 independent copies of data in 3 geographic locations. The data can be controlled and moved by DAM's application rather than the storage platform itself. More than one type of storage media to store that data, the ability to automate and repair and replace corrupted data through checksum verification, and ensure that no one person has a full right access to all copies. But that's at the storage platform level. But if we think about today, data growth is everywhere. By 2025, the global data sphere will be 175 zettabytes. I can't even imagine how large that is, but it sounds big. Out of that number, 80% of the world's data is unstructured. And what do we mean by that? It's file and object. It's not nice little columnar stuff that sits in an Access database or in a SQL database. Much of that will be research data, pathology scans, digital evidence for the police, libraries and artifacts. It will be images scanned, documents scanned, and photographs of objects that you want to preserve. It's all the data that this conference talks about. But a cyber attack happens every 11 seconds. Cybercrime costs more per year than all the natural disasters, and it's more profitable by a factor of 2 than the drugs trade. So, where are the criminals going? By 2025, the cost of cybercrime will be $10.5 trillion. Petabyte scale data requires a different approach to protecting your data than just backups. So Dell Technologies, we look at frameworks like the NIST frameworks, that's the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and what we want to be able to do is help our customers, help you who want to preserve data in the context of a ransomware attack, to be able to identify if threats are occurring, to protect by stopping the threat and locking out in real time any bad actors, to detect and respond as you see something happening, and responding to not just an event as it happening, but maybe phishing, alerting for emails and unusual behavior, and allowing you to recover. And recovering petabyte scale data, as we know with using a traditional backup, may take many months, even longer. So we heard from the discussions yesterday, it was about working with your IT team, your preservation team, and your security team. The risk, well, that's on you. You know, what's your appetite for disrupted operations, data theft, breach, ransomware payment, reputational damage, or you could have peace of mind. Peace of mind by looking at how you could deploy the NIST framework into your digital preservation solutions. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I'm Steve Daly. I'm service owner for digital preservation at the National Archives in the UK. Now, we do all the things you'd expect a National Archive to do, but we also lead the development of a suite of open source digital preservation tools used by us and used by the global digital preservation community. So that's all of you. And before you preserve something, whether it's physical or digital, you need to know what it is. You need to know what it's made of. And so for digital files, you can use our Droid tool to characterize those files, to work out exactly and precisely what each file format is. And Droid does that through reference to our database of file IDs and file format signatures. And that is Pronom. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. So behind me here, you see this is Pronom. And as you will have heard at the Digital Preservation Awards, it's 20 years old. And it's getting a little bit old for us now. It's getting it hard for us to keep it supportable and accessible and usable and available and secure. Now, the back end of it isn't that much better either. So don't tell anybody, but this is Access 2010 database, and we manually copy and paste the data across into the live system. So there's a real scope for error there. Now, why am I telling you this, though? Well, I'm telling you because we made a thing. This is the new Pronom. Now, it's not live yet. We're going to be engaging with all of you over the coming months to take it live, to make sure it will do everything you need it to, and hopefully a bit more. Now, the new Pronom is much more technically advanced than the old one. So this is a cloud-based AWS serverless application. Under the hood, rather than being a relational database, it's a graph database. It's an RDF triple store. And that's going to support our ambition for linked open data, to let us join up this data with other similar repositories around the world, like the Library of Congress or Wikidata, for example. We're really excited about what it means for automation of our workflows. So this dashboard you're seeing here is contributions coming in from people like you, passing through our validation, testing, and going out into Droid releases. And there's much less scope for error there. It's an automated workflow. Other things, though, it's not all about us, it's about you too. So we've been looking at the usability of the application and focus really on improving that. So here it's a responsive design web application, so it works just as well on a mobile phone as it does on your desktop computer. If you have an urge to submit a file format signature when you're on the beach or in the bus or something like that, then you're more than able to do that. but we've also focused on accessibility as well. So we intend to be WCAG2 compliant. So it's going to be much better for people who benefit from the use of assistive technologies, such as screen readers. But again, why am I telling you all this? Well, again, it's not just about us. It's a community project. If any of you have an interest in file formats, as I'm sure most of you do, if you think you could help us develop this, if you think you could help us test it, or if you just have some ideas about where you think we should take this project in the future, then drop us a line at that first email address, the Pronom one. If you've seen us talk about other things during these conferences, or if there's anything else you want to talk about around digital preservation, then that more general address beneath that. Or even better, come and talk to us in person. We have a stand just around the corner from this theatre in the foyer. We're talking about a different thing each day. Yesterday it was web archiving. Today it's file formats. So that's Droid and Pronom. So come and talk to us. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you very much.
So we've still got a minute left of Steve's slot, if anybody wants to ask. Yeah, we're on schedule, I think. A very quick question for anyone? On perhaps expressing delight that we're moving away from an Access 2010 database? Shh, sorry. Okay, well, let's crack on then. Please. We've got 2 presentations from Peter, so he's got
the
8
speed
minutes.
dating, I've got 2 slots. And so, first one, I'm going to be talking about social media. And the second one, I'm going to be talking about social community. Twitter preservation is interesting in 2 aspects. One is the social aspect, which is it's part of the culture. It's also becoming official records. Government bodies and states are communicating using tweets, so they need to be preserved. The other aspect that's interesting about them is they are multi-part assets. They consist of many parts, 280 characters, 4 images, or 1 video. They need preserving in a specific way to keep the atomic tweet preserved. So that's what I'm going to be talking about. So, first thing, multi-part assets. 2.5 years ago, we changed our data model to accommodate an information object with multiple content objects, multi-part assets, be they attachments to email, be they parts of a book even, but increasingly it is a multi-part asset, and each part needs preserving and independently, but rendering together, so you can view it together. Keeping each of those ingested, keeping each of those up to date will happen automatically using our auto-preservation, which is on the way. It will also happen on each individual content object, and the preservation and the access representations of those will go forward, so they're always in a preservable state, keeping the original, but also keeping the access representations as well, so they can be viewed immediately. And together they form an immutable record. Okay. One of the things we learned, one of the lessons we learned was there are several social media harvesting solutions out there, and we thought, well, that's good. We could just harvest their output. We could just harvest their content. But what we found was that the storage of that social media quite often spoiled the authenticity of the tweet. It was a level of indirection between what was in the preservation system and what had been actually tweeted in the first place. The other thing we found out is, and I don't know whether you saw in the news, that on the 5th of September this year, the Sacramento data center for Twitter burnt hot during a heat wave, and they lost 20% of their capacity during that day. So we think of these institutions as bulletproof, but preservation becomes important, let alone people's ability to delete tweets and deny them in the future. We went to alpha test with some public institutions. This is one I'd like to share with Marta Krillich from the Boston City Archives. What I want to point out here is that the benefit she saw for official communications was that they can be used, they're readable into perpetuity. They start their journey forever until you choose to delete it and somebody approves your deletion. And it's all part of a federated preservation system. That tweet will be alongside the website, it'll be alongside the emails, it'll be alongside the internal documents. So one search will find all of that. The process, somebody tweets. Within Preservica, you set up the harvesting of this account. Now, intellectual property is an issue. You have to have permission to tweet that account. That's on the user. Then there's ingest, and there's identification using droid and pronom of the constituent parts that go into preservation. And then they're preserved, they're indexed, they can be findable and rendered within the preservation system. That's it.
Very good. We'll clap that one.
I'm not going to run around and come back on again, so consider this the encore. So, preservation has been the domain of the high-end users. Typically, it's been quite hard to do. It's technical, it's complex, it needs expertise, it needs horsepower, it needs IT, it needs a lot. One of the things we set out to do at Preservica was to make it more accessible in both senses of the word, both in terms of WCAG 2.0 and 2.1 forthcoming, but also in terms of how do people get started with preservation. And of course the solution is community and help. Who do you ask? How can you ask? How can you find stuff out? DPC did great work, so do other bodies, but we thought we could do more to help as well. And the other thing we've done is made the product more usable by have a new UX and have it documented by the users as well, but also automated if you want it to be. If you want it, Preservica will take care of the formats for you for access and preservation based upon a policy that you can choose in the future. So, in designing these products, we also built a community. We decided people need people to ask. So we have a set of outreach programs. We have user groups. We've just gone back to face-to-face user groups. Within the last 2 or 3 months, we had one out in Boston. We've had one in Oxford talking to the users. We have monthly online updates. We have webinars to our users. We have in-person workshops where we get down to the nitty-gritty of what will this look like. We have special interest groups focusing on a particular thing. Wider community, this is part of the wider community. I want to talk about the community hub. Okay. The community hub, community.preservica.com, is for our users. Of course it is. But there's also a lot of content in there for the community, for other people to contribute, ask, contribute. So community.preservica.com. If you want to see the easier to use product in its simplest, basic, smallest form, starter.preservica.com. It's free. Go sign up. There's a preservation system there up to 5 megabytes. So go have a play with that. It's a real system. It characterizes and normalizes. We've got new versions of that coming along. So please do have a look at that. For the counter, we're just approaching 3,000 people signing up for using that. So it's got wide acceptance, and that user interface will snowball up into the main user interface, user experience into our main product. And as I say, on the community, we've got a set of a column there of information and content and abilities to discuss for non-users or other preservation people, and we've got a set for existing users. And that's it.
Well, we felt you didn't have enough Preservica in your life, so you can't keep us down. I'm going to talk about a totally different type of paradigm to what I was just talking about. I was talking about embedded digital preservation, but sometimes you can't embed it because it's a decommissioning case. And in the case of Lotus Notes, about time too. So this is an instance from the Department of Health and Social Care in the UK. We're allowed to talk about it. They identify themselves. And they have 34 million emails recorded in 838 Lotus Notes databases. It's only 6 terabytes, which isn't huge, but it's a lot of objects. And this is needed to be kept for quite a long time for inquiries, for holding government for account, parliamentary questions, etc. So what are we going to do about this? Because it's costing a fortune and the number of people who actually know how to use this is witheringly small. Well, this is a different paradigm to the one I was just describing. It's extract, transform and load. The extract process is done by a specialist off-the-shelf software, Swing software, run by AD7, a specialist Lotus Notes migration company. The appraisal is keep everything. That was easy. And you convert each RTF record to PDF with embedded attachments. And that's not perfect, but that's what the software, that's as good as you can get. We mimic one of the Lotus Notes virtual hierarchies. We get all the metadata out as XML, and we've got everything. So then we have to transform it to a preservation-ready format. We transform the metadata into Preservica-ready OPEX form. We map the metadata to a more suitable schema. We set up a indexing schema to allow them to index and do faceted search. We extract the embedded objects out the PDF for separate preservation. We QA it, and then it's all ready. And that needs a custom program because it's very specific to that particular customer. And then we upload it. We just send it all into Preservica using an AWS API, and we allow the digital preservation to munge its way through. And we run about 100 concurrent ingest processes of 1,000 records each. And we stoke the system up. We add extra servers to get through that list. And then we confirm, did it arrive? That's great, get rid of the process. So that is the whole thing. Now that's a lot of copies of things moving through, because you get it into the intermediate store, you convert it to this, then you do this, then you do this. So you've got to balance that process to stop it swamping any particular point before you can say, yeah, it's good, it's gone, we can get rid of it. So what did we learn? Well, what we learned is the art of compromise. These are records. They're not memory institution things. They're records for government purposes. Extract is lossy. We accept that. It is not perfect. There's some links between emails are gone, some visual changes, but it's better than nothing. Some of the content files are unreadable. Some are poor quality metadata. Welcome to our world. Security issues, nightmares of special characters, emojis, Latin characters, etc. And you end up with a 1% of difficult cases, but that's still 300,000 records. But we got them across. It took around 6 months to ingest them. It became 58 million files once you got the attachments out. You had 613 file locations, 14 terabytes once it was unpacked, and it is now being used. The recent infected blood inquiry, which is now paying reparations to people with hepatitis and various other illnesses that were infected, is using records out of this database, and it's provided content to them. So this is a different paradigm to what I was talking about before, but it makes the content live, usable, useful, and doing its job. Thank you.
Hi all. So my name is Ishwar, and I'm going to talk about, it's a bit different topic. It's related to like the teaching to students and staffs, whoever deal with the research data. So I'm from University of Warwick, and my role is a research data officer, and I provide support to students and staff, whoever deals with the research data in their project, in their study. So those students could be undergraduates, or postgraduate taught, or postgraduate research. And my background is actually materials and manufacturing. I did my PhD there, and I start generating lots of data, and I start, fall in love with research data management. So so the problem with the teaching, educating student is students go to a course and they actually work for that, get their degree. But the most important thing is we need to go to the basics and teach students like what's importance of research data is in their project. Because if they start from the start of the project, then it will be very easy for them during the graduation, file handling system and other things. So in my course, I teach them about what are the basics of research data. For example, the research data lifecycle, about some projects can collect data, it could be observation, it all depends upon the methodology. After you collect some data, it needs about the processing, and after processing, you do analyze. Once you have the analyze, you decide what you want to publish, or which figure you want to publish in a journal, and etc. And after you have published a journal article, you decide to preserve some data so that you can use for different projects or you can use for different articles. And then it's the reuse. So this research data is like a whole the cycle. It starts from the collection and goes to the reuse. And it can, so project can be 3 years or 4 years, but the data exists for a long time. So how I tackle this thing, teaching students on this, is through the case study. So my case study is like, prior to case study, I do a 1-hour introduction, what is research data management is, very basic, pictographical, make it interesting. Because one of the feedback I always got from students, it's a very dry subject. I really don't like it. So you need to make it interesting because we need to start with the basics. So after the 1-hour introductory, I run case study. And case study could be disciplinary focused with medical, with engineering, with could be humanities, with arts. In arts, there is no data. There is called information. So you need to actually advocate. Your data is not just a number. Data could be anything, image or anything. So I do some case studies with them, like ask some students to break into groups, ask like what data will be produced, what will be the format of data. So like just like thinking, what will be the size of the data? This is always the tricky part. Students always struggle, like size, I don't know, megabyte, terabyte, or anything. How will the data be documented and described? How will your data be structured and stored? What are the plans for the data sharing during the project, but not only during, but also after your project? Are there any special requirements if you're carrying some sensitive data, or is it personal data, or is it public data? And what are your plans once your project finishes? So telling students about some basic things, give them the idea, okay, this is a bit important when it comes with the data. And then showing them, so students work with the case study, and then after the case study, they present as a poster or maybe as a presentation, okay, we thought about these questions and we have these answers. And after my presentation, I also show them the answers, some basics, so like what could be the research data, the simple definition. It can be many things. It could be analog, it could be digital, it could be primary, it could be secondary, or it could be just an image, or it could be just quantitative. So very varied definitions. But also how metadata can look like, but again, disciplinary metadata could be much more. But this is more like a generic. Then file naming strategies, order by date. I'm not going much into detail about order by type, order by subject, order by forced numbering. Somebody just like, I just put numbers and move on. Or it could be, and simple folder structure, and about teaching about the backups. And this is the feedback I received from students. So my last slide. Yes, there is a growth of interest among students, which is around 300 to 400. Some people want to further learn about it. And yeah, that's my presentation.
So thanks very much, Ishwell. We've got 5 speakers left, and our speakers are doing brilliantly well in terms of their timekeeping. I just wanted to encourage you in the audience. We'll probably have a few minutes left at the end for questions, so do be thinking about questions either for individual speakers or reflections on the whole session. And also the people online as well, if you're joining us online, do please use the virtual question putter. We have it here, so if you want to pose questions for this session, then do please online. Anyway, we have our next speaker. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Today, I'm talking about why digital preservation should be treated as a public policy. As we know now, everybody here lives in the digital area. We can do everything online, healthy culture. But how many we use this, more cyber attacks we surf. So, government try to create public policy to respond digital transformation and cybersecurity. But I analyze the public policy with Brazil, France, Spain, and UK, and although digital preservation is the same field of digital as cybersecurity and digital transformation, this public policy, there's a gap. They don't talk about digital preservation. They only talking about cybersecurity and public and digital service. And perhaps it's like government create public service, create more document, and want to keep safe in a box for avoiding only cyber attacks, but they don't create a strategy to assess those documents in the future. So this is a few questions why this public policy must to be changed or create another public policy specific to digital preservation. One of the question is what needs to be changed. So we have to use as many as possible documents that we saw here these days, like OIs, like a repository, like so many things important to convince government to include digital preservation as a public policy. Because how many people here knows that everything happened when top down, when the order it began from the government. Many people here from the public sector, and we know how much is difficult to approve something. But when this thing comes from the government, this is easy. So because of this, so important to include digital preservation as a public policy. Thank you so much.
Oh, good afternoon, everyone. Oh, thank you. Yeah, okay, yay. We're so close to the sparkly drinks. I saw them out there, so we're getting there. So my name's Thomas Padilla. I'm at the Internet Archive, and I'm here to talk about ARCH, or Archives Research Compute Hub. I have an update and an invitation. So what is the challenge that we're trying to respond to? It's tough to support the computational use of collections as data. So researchers who want to do text mining, data mining, digital humanities, digital scholarship, AI, machine learning, et cetera, tough to do. Infrastructure challenge, human resourcing challenge, and then it's a cross-institutional collaboration challenge as well. If you're thinking about researchers whose requests sort of span multiple institutions, or the too long didn't read version of that, a socio-technical challenge, or what we might say is turtles all the way down. So our response at the Internet Archive has been to develop ARCH, or Archives Research Compute Hub. It's a platform developed in collaboration with Archives Unleashed colleagues at the University of Waterloo and York University in Canada. Simply put, ARCH streamlines access to collections as data for computational uses. Our initial focus is on web archive collections, but we will expand to other kinds of digital collections, text collections, image collections, and so forth. ARCH leverages the Internet Archive's nonprofit owned high-performance computing infrastructure and leverages it to enable scale. It integrates complementary research services at the Internet Archive, and at the end of the day, it enables collection managers like you and your colleagues and researchers to easily generate derivative data sets from collections to support computational research. Just a couple of quick snapshots of the platform as it is currently. What you're looking at on the screen is just a collection overview. It's like the bird's eye view of collections that are being acted upon with sort of a queue of different jobs that create derivative data sets out of a collection. What might you want to do? So say you have a researcher who says, hey, I want all of the plain text data in this collection, or I want all of the PDFs, or all of the audio data, or all of the images, or I even want relational data about how various aspects of this collection are composed. We have turnkey jobs that generate those derivative data sets at scale across the collection. These jobs were defined by our engagement with researchers and the lessons learned from the Archives Unleashed project. We're also developing IPython notebooks that will support exploratory analysis and teaching with derivative data sets produced through ARCH. Researcher engagement is comprehensive and ongoing. We've supported 2 cohorts of 10 international research teams in the Netherlands, France, Denmark, United States, Canada, Luxembourg, United States again, typo maybe, Mexico and Australia. Research topics are really diverse, everything from Latin American women's rights movements to viral health misinformation and the study of queer web archives. Development is ongoing. We're working on dataset publication. As I mentioned earlier, we're currently supporting the analysis of web archive collections, but we intend to expand the scope of that to apply to most kinds of digital collections. Eventually, we'll get to multi-institutional collections as data, which will essentially entail aggregation or ingest of multi-institutional collections for those researchers that want to do computational work that, their scope spans more than one institution, different size, different policies, and so forth. And of course, features requested by you. Really hope that you'll get involved. We're actively recruiting pilot partners through this URL. Not sure that you remember that, but I'll also be at the Sparkly Drink area, so I'd love to talk with you. I'd love to work with you. Public release will be in Q1 of 23. Thank you so much.
So, hello, more Preservica. But I'm going to talk about Pronom, and we all love Pronom, right? Where am I? Right, so role of Pronom, Steve's already talked about. A couple of really important things from this slide, though. Every format in Pronom has a unique identifier. And Pronom's data isn't static. It evolves, changes over time. They've recently released their 108th update. So this is 20 years of history. And since joining Preservica 3 months ago, my main task really has been to do an historic analysis of Pronom's data to understand what changes have occurred to, I'm going to illustrate, what those changes have occurred and what they should mean to a digital preservation practitioner. So today I'm going to present some of the more interesting stories. That's another good point. Changes may result in the need to re-identify or re-characterize formats. You normally re-identify at ingest, but if Pronom's data then subsequently changes, you may need to re-identify your formats. So 3 illustrative examples. The disappearing PUIDs. So PUIDs should be persistent. These are the identifiers. PUIDs are also assigned sequentially. So I was looking at the data. Where's 366? It's not there. So I was able to trace it back. Pronom update 10, this is 2007, I think. It's definitely there. Pronom update 16, it's not. But we have this new format that has been added and assigned the number FMT 160, device independent file format. Turns out that is actually the same format. There's a secondary identifier called just a primary key essentially. And then in a later version of Pronom, it got renamed again. But it's the same format, it's just changed. It shouldn't really happen, but unfortunately it did. So from identification purposes, you certainly want to re-identify any XFMT 366. Next one, SIARD, as I may have pronounced that wrong. But SIARD's software-independent archiving relational database is developed by the Swiss Federal Archives. We've diligently added this to Pronom back in the update 21, back in 2009. We called it essentially CR2. The interesting thing there is that version 2 of CR didn't actually go out until 2015. So we updated the name a little bit later, and then the Swiss Federal Archives got in touch and said, I think you'll find this version 1, so we changed it to version 1. Then version 2 was released. So effectively, at different points in time, we've had 2 PUIDs that have been associated with CR2. So what you probably want to do, if you've still got an FMT 161 that is listed as CR2, you want to recharacterize that. Last one, VOB. So VOB video objects, it's a media format, it's a subset of MPEG video. We handle subsets within Pronom by setting what we call priority relationships, so the more specific format has priority over the more general one. When we added VOB, we got the priorities the wrong way round. So the MPEG formats had priority over VOB, should have been and was fixed later on, about 2 years later. So if you identified any formats as MPEG 1 or 2 during this time, you might want to recharacterize them because they might have actually been VOB in the first place. So this really stretches the surface. There's 500 or so formats that I've assessed so far where I'm making a re-identification recommendation. We've published them all on our Preservica GitHub wiki. Also on there is the what I'm called the Pronom House of Curiosities, where I go into these 3 specific stories in a lot more detail. Do have a look. But the point is that, you know, we'll publish this information. It will grow over time. That's it. And that one.
All right, hello, I am Elizabeth England from the U.S. National Archives and Records Administration, and I'm going to quickly tell you about our newly available linked open data. For some background information, since 2019, NARA has made, yes, I'm on the right screen, okay. NARA has made its digital preservation framework available on GitHub. The framework includes preservation plans for 16 categories of record types, such as still image, email, etc., a risk and prioritization matrix that uses over 40 data points to assess risk for more than 650 file formats or format variants, and prioritize them for action within NARA, and preservation plans for these file formats. The file formats preservation action plans in GitHub are presented as a big spreadsheet. For each format, as available, there's links to the format specification, other community resources such as Pronom, Wikidata, and the Library of Congress, and NARA's risk level assessment, preservation plan, and more. In order to make the file format plans more machine actionable, Leslie Johnston, the Director of Digital Preservation, and I undertook a project to model the plans as linked data. Last year, we provided test data to a number of folks, some of whom are here in the room or joining online today, and we are very grateful for you sharing your expertise with us to help us improve this work. This year, we revised the data model and developed a workflow for the transformation from the spreadsheet as seen in GitHub to the linked data. And I have to take a moment to acknowledge Phil Ashworth from the National Archives UK, who has guided me, a novice to linked data, over the past few months and has done more to help than I'll ever be able to thank him for. So we publicly released the linked data just over 2 weeks ago, and I want to note that this does not replace what has been in GitHub, and the framework will continue to be available there as well. The file format plans as linked data can be accessed in 3 ways. There is a bulk download available. You can browse the full list of file formats or browse by the record category. And all linked data files are available in the RDF Turtle format. Here's an example of the page for browsing by the record category for digital design and vector graphics, and clicking on each link for each format will take you to the plain text linked data file. While I don't have many specific timeframes to share, these are some of the things in our minds for future work, are exploring both internal and external integration opportunities. One exciting update since I prepared these slides is we submitted a proposal for a Wikidata identifier. So I scheduled a tweet that maybe came out already, maybe about to, I don't know, but it has the link if you want to comment on that there. And we are exploring integrating internally with NARA's processing and preservation repository, continuing to refine the data model, and we welcome other suggestions. Thank you.
Nearly there, last one. So I am going to be talking about the work of the DPC BitList Task Force towards the BitList 2022. For those of you who are unfamiliar, the BitList is a list of at-risk digital materials been nominated by the global digital preservation community. Every item on the BitList is there because someone in the community has identified the risk and the need for urgent action. And in turn, the BitList offers a snapshot of the concerns with respect to the risks faced by the different types of content in varying conditions and contexts. There's 6 risk classifications, which you can see flashing there, and these are used to highlight those which require the most urgent action. And the BitList is a way to advocate. It draws attention to entries and materials that require urgent action, but it's not all bad news. It also is an opportunity to have examples of good practice which can be used to help mitigate or reduce risks. which brings us to a brief history. First bit list was in 2017. Every 2 years, there's been a comprehensive review and revision by a bit list jury, full jury. And then in those alternate years, there has been a more light review where there is a task force that looks at any updates and developments over the last year, which have created a trend towards reduced or increased risks. So that brings us to the work of the DPC BitList Task Force, which is made of members from the DPC Advocacy and Community Subcommittee. And so far, we have had DP staff and members of the task force read through the 2021 BitList, identify any potential developments or work that has changed the risk profiles, and come up with a list of 14 suggested entries with a trend in 2022. We also had a meeting last month where 13 of those 14 were approved, and there's one pending that we are requesting more input from subject matter experts or even practitioners who have worked with the types of materials. So in the next 2 slides, I'm going to just quickly show you those 14 with an invitation to give feedback. So the first, as you can see right here, the one that is highlighted, this is the one that is still pending the decision. Thinking about things about, again, has there been anything significantly since November 2021? Has COVID and pandemic and greater strains created a increased risk from 2021 or 2022? As you can also see here, these are 7 of the 14. We have them generally grouped into categories, so this is a way to kind of see signposts to that. And these are other ones that there was consensus that is moving towards greater risk compared to where it was at last year. Here's the second set, which includes, there's those 2 here for MMOs and politically sensitive data, consensus towards greater risk. But again, it's not always bad news. Risk classifications and trends can change over time, and as already evidenced by the presentations and awards during iPres, I can already doing a checklist of things to help with the robustness of BitList. But you can see email and different research output entries have had a reduced risk since then. So I'm actually doing okay on time, I think. So I'm going to pause real so you can do a quick look of it. But really, this is about an invitation to you, the community. BitList is a community-supported resource. It comes from practical experience. We need you to help make it robust and reliable and verifiable. So we are looking, if you have any interest or good case studies especially that you want to highlight, let us know. We will be at the DPC table, or you can email us. We're hoping to get this feedback by the end of September because we are aiming to have launch on World Digital Preservation Day of this year, which, mark your calendars, is the 3rd of November. And that's it for me.
We have very limited time for questions. That was 21 presentations in 90 minutes, a lot of information to take in. Has anybody got a pressing question? We can take 1 or 2 before we go for a sparkly drink. Or alternatively, grab all these wonderful presenters and their great initiatives, programs, tools, services over a sparkly drink and discuss it in more depth and learn more about this wonderful work that's happening in the digital preservation community. And can I just thank our presenters once more, and please join me in thanking them for today.